Good morning, everybody. My name is Catherine Heine, Katie Heine with the VCDC. Thank you guys all so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. Thank you to our legislators for being here as well, and our moderator, Sandy McEwen. We're happy to have you. We're going to get started. We are running with a new format. It's going to include live questions as well as pre-selected questions from the moderator. Sandy will go into more detail about how that works, but you will come up to the podium just as we did last time, but we'll have time for a little bit more during each topic. Deb and myself will be available. If you have a written question, please let us know. We'll get it to the moderator. If you would like to speak or ask your question in the respective topic, again, just raise your hand and we'll give you a lineup. We'll tell you which number you are or which one you are next, and we'll go from there. Thank you again for being here, and I will turn it over to Sandy.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. As Katie indicated, my name is Sandy McEwen. I'm a professor. Yep. But it's on, though. Better? Better? Yeah. Woohoo! Better? All righty, then. Wow. I didn't think I could screw it up in the first 30 seconds. My name is Sandy McEwen. I am a professor at the University of South Dakota in the Criminal Justice and Legal Studies Department, and I am very happy to see all of my fellow Vermillionites here this morning. Welcome, and thank you for being here to speak with our legislators. So the way that this is going to run this morning is that our representatives are going to have an opportunity to give a little bit of an opening statement, talk about what they are doing and the accomplishments they've had this legislative session. And then we are going to run through a set of pre-selected topics, including the budget, education, South Dakota elections and voting, property rights and taxes, health and social services. And we'll have 15 minutes per section to take questions. We will start with one chosen question that I will give to the representatives, and I'm already collecting written questions from people up here for that, and then we will open it up to the floor for your questions. Generally speaking, the big rules are keep to the time limit so everybody has an opportunity to speak, and as I tell my students in their classes when they are having debates, don't be a jerk. I wanted to also make a point of thanking the series sponsors, the USD Opportunity Center, Maloney Real Estate, Masaba, Premier Real Estate and Property Management, Sodexo, Biomat USA, Vermillion Hy-Vee, Dakota Realty and Property Management, and Polaris. And also thank you to this weekend's refreshment sponsor, which is the Clay County Republicans. So thanks for the donuts, man. That's awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. We're going to turn it over to our representatives for their opening statements. Mrs. Davis, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. Try that again. All right, we'll try that again there. Okay. Senator Sidney Davis, live north of Vermillion here on a farm with my husband and 3 kids. I also work in healthcare full-time and enjoy being a part of the legislature. I am the vice chair of Senate Health and Human Services. I also sit on Taxation Committee and Ag and Natural Resources Committee. So I appreciate the opportunity to do all those things. I have sponsored a lot of bills this year. I probably took on a little too much, but I like being busy. I like working hard and trying to solve problems. And so I appreciate everybody's input, your emails. I get a lot of them. I do my best. I read them. Responding, I'm a little behind on, but again, I appreciate them and thank you for your attendance today.
You can definitely talk about the bills that you sponsored now. You'll also have an opportunity for closing statements, so at whichever time you prefer.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Casson, would you like to?
Well, I didn't know I was next. I was just asking a clarifying question. Thank you. Representative Chris Casson. I live right here in Vermillion. This is my 3rd session, 2nd term, serving in the legislature. I serve on the Appropriations Committee. It's been a really busy session. My first 2 years, I think I've said this, we didn't contemplate cuts to the budget. We had a significant amount of revenue coming in, and this is the first time we've had to contemplate cuts, which has been sort of a different experience. I will highlight all of the bills that I don't sponsor many bills, but I have sponsored a few this year that have been successful. But I did want to highlight one because I see the gentleman standing in the back of the room. there was an inspiration came from one of these things last year regarding how could we best serve the students and future educators of South Dakota. And the gentleman standing in the back of the room mentioned, student teacher stipends is something that's happening throughout our country and even our neighboring states, and we're actually losing some of our student teachers as a result of not offering stipends for these individuals to stay and student teach right here in South Dakota. And so, as of Friday, I'm happy to announce that I was the House Prime, and Senator Davis was the Senate Prime on a bill to start it's a one-time grant program, but it will be it's the start to a student teacher stipend program in South Dakota, which is a huge step for us forward to level the playing field and to keep our student teachers here. So again, one, I think it's an important step for education. Two, I think it also underscores the importance of community engagement, involvement, and ideas from our constituents who, those ideas come forth from you folks who live these things every day. I'm in the education field, but I'm in higher education, but I'm not in what would impact our student teachers and our future education workforce. So just wanted to highlight that for a couple of reasons. One, it's good news, and two, it underscores why we do appreciate input and feedback from you folks. So again, appreciative and look forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Mr. Casson. Mr. Sharma?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you all showing up and coming today. We really want to learn what your thoughts are on things that are still pending. We certainly can talk to us about things that passed or failed, and that's fine. My name is William Shorma. I grew up in North Dakota, went to college there, worked in our family business. I moved a business from North Dakota to South Dakota to Yankton back in 1992. Within that business, we started another one called Truxedo. Sherco was the business we moved. And those businesses, along with the current business that we have created over 600 South Dakota jobs. It's something I'm very proud of. I'm married to my first wife of 49 years, going to be 50 this October. And we love living in Dakota Dunes. We lived in Yankton. We loved Yankton as well. That's how I ended up down here in this district. She really liked the Dakota Dunes area and found a home that I hadn't looked at yet. It had a levee in the backyard when we bought it, right after the flood in 2011. So let's see. So this is my third year in the legislature. In the House. I served a year in the Senate back in 2016 and learned a lot about the process. Then ran for the House because Mr. Bolin over there was terming out and ran for the Senate, and I knew I couldn't beat him, so I ran for the House and I lost by 28 votes in a primary. So I had a little bit of a sabbatical in between there, but that's all right. I like serving the folks. So I brought some bills. We can talk about those maybe at another point at the end or what have you. One has passed and one failed. But honestly, I work on bills every day, every single day. I have a committee meeting every single day of the week, and that's where the proponents and opponents come and give us their positions on those bills, and we can weigh the pros and the cons, and we can make a decision of where we want to be on those bills. So, I sponsored other bills as well, but the key is there are about 430 bills or so brought this year by the House and the Senate, and every one of those has to have a hearing. So we're a busy legislature. They all don't make it to the floor, but they all have a hearing. So I look forward to the questions today, and thank you to the sponsors. Thank you, Professor McQuan?
Close, really close. McEwen.
McEwen, okay. Professor McEwen for leading us through this, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
So our first area that we're going to be discussing this morning is the budget. And whenever there is a question from you guys, I will open with that one, and this one does come from the floor. With approximately 40% of the state's operating budget coming from federal sources and the likely major reduction in such sources in the future, what contingencies has the South Dakota legislature adopted for that reduction? So I'll start with you, Mr. Casson.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I mean, it's something that we struggle with. It's something we struggle with, virtually every day. I'm just thinking about last week, we had VOCA funding, which is Victims of Crime Advocates, and there's several providers. I believe, unfortunately, there's the facility here in Vermillion is having to close, but we struggle with this every day, that there is funding reductions that are happening at the federal level that are impacting us at the state level. And so, we heard this on the House floor this week, and I'm obviously 100% supportive to try and put a Band-Aid on what we're doing to provide funding for these programs, and I have a list of them somewhere. This is just a Southeast South Dakota program. This is all the way across the state programs, and I believe it's a $5 million. Senator Davis, are you the prime on this thing? Anyway, but it did pass that. It did pass the House, and it's heading to the Senate. But again, it is something we struggle with: is how best do we make up for some of the lack of federal funding that's coming in? And yes, it is a problem.
I would say, a question kind of resolved around contingency plans. I don't know that there is a lot, because at the end of the day, you've got to have money to be able to, like Representative Casson said, you got to be able to Band-Aid the problem. I think it's something that we're watching closely, and I wish it's something that we could be more proactive about, but currently just the budget situation, we're looking and trying to prioritize cuts right now, not looking to where we can backfill programs that if the federal funding goes, what do we do? And so there's been a lot of maneuvering, a lot of creative thinking with these proposed budget cuts, and we're doing our best to prioritize, and I guess, I wish I had something more consoling to offer, but that's just the reality of what we're living in.
Well, the reality is that we hear in the media, we hear just like you do, that the federal government is proposing cuts. And we don't know the details of what those cuts are. We understand what the governor's cuts in South Dakota were proposed as, and we can work to fix those. When it comes to a federal cut, we don't have that voice. We have representatives that are on the, of course, that have the voice. But the bottom line is we have to react and figure out how we're going to minimize that impact on South Dakota. Just one example, if the federal government says that South Dakota's share of Medicaid is not 10%, but 20%, that's $35 million a year more that we're going to have to come up with. That takes away our dollars to use for other things. So there are all kinds of decisions like that that are going to be made over the course of the next, in the future, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with all those. Some of those are harder pills to swallow than others, but we deal with those kinds of things on a smaller scale right now every day, because there's not too much being sent down to us. But the state legislature, maybe I should take just a minute and give you, right now we're working on one-time funding bills. What kind of one-time funding, what things should we be funding with one-time money? We have a limited amount of money. What should we be funding? It's a very good process. That process is that first the House, the Senate, and the Democrats all individually caucus. The House Republicans, the Senate Republicans, and the Democrats caucus. They decide individually what their priorities are. We get to vote on that. We get to pick our priorities based on what we individual legislators feel. That gives kind of a direction to our appropriators, like Representative Casson, to negotiate with appropriations on what those priorities should be. In the end, then, as a body, we get to vote whether we agree with what they negotiated between them. So we're in that process right now on one-time spending. There'll be another process for one-time ongoing money.
Okay, this is the time that is open now for citizens to bring their questions related to the budget. So if anybody has a question, we'd invite you to approach the microphone. You'll have 1 minute to ask your question. Our friend Raina over there will tell you when you're running out of time.
Jim Bolin, I live in Canton, former legislator. My question would be, is there an appetite to use reserves to plug some of the holes in the budget at the present time? What's the possibility of using reserves that we have to plug the holes? Thank you.
Yeah, good question, Senator Boland. Right now, we are, you know, you understand, Senator Boland understands our roadmap, and that's how we get to the final stages of our budget. I think all things are on the table being contemplated at this current point. I would say that hasn't been a large part of the conversation right now, trying to figure out if we can make this work without tapping into the reserves. You know, the governor proposed a 11.8 or 11.6% budget reserves for this year. A lot of the discussion now is, should we keep it at 11.6 or 11.8%, or should we reduce that to the standard 10% reserve? By reducing that, I think we're talking about 35 or 40 million dollars of additional one-time dollars. So that seems to be more of the question of reduction of what the governor proposed to that standard 10% has been a larger part of our conversation this year. But I would tell you that everything is on the table at this point.
Senator Davis?
I don't have a whole lot more to add. As we know, Representative Caston's on our budget committee, and appreciate his leadership there. So he's a little more in tune to all those details. But I would agree, there really hasn't been a lot of talk about tapping into the reserves yet to try to fill these holes. That's all I really have more to add.
More than one person is asking about the sunset provision for the sales tax and asking, you know, if you were to move the sunset provision from 2027 to 2025, that would result in some increased revenue. Is that an option that's on the table? And if not, you know, what would be the concerns with that? So we start with Sharma.
So the sunset provision would take the sales tax from 4.2% to 4.5%, back to 4.5. There's also a proposal that would raise the sales tax to 5%, generating enough for an across-the-board cut on property taxes. Personally, I'm not a fan, because who are we at the legislature supposed to help protect? Okay? Low to moderate income folks should be a high priority, and shifting tax from property to individual sales tax means those individuals have to pay tax so that we can pass on a reduction to those that may be able to afford it better than they can. So, you know, they talk about all the money that we would gain by outside visitors coming to the state, and there's a lot of things that talk on the opposite side of that. Honestly, we haven't had to debate that, because it's not on the floor for debate. There are proposals, there's a variety of proposals on property tax that all have some pros and cons built in them. I don't think there's a perfect bill. I know that leadership is asking for perhaps a summer study this summer to kind of look at it. We've done that before. It's a complex issue, and there's going to be winners and losers no matter how you do it. So whatever we come up with, there are going to be some over here that say it's a terrible idea, some over here that say it's a great idea. We really have to look at the impact that it's having on all of the citizens across the state.
Senator Davis?
Thanks for the question. It's a good one. With the, I was one that felt strongly that when we did that sales tax reduction, that we needed to put the sunset on there in the event something like we're experiencing right now would happen. I have not really heard any serious talk or discussion about the sunset being altered in any way, shape, or form yet this session. That doesn't mean that it couldn't happen, but since it hasn't been talked about, I tend to believe that that's probably not something that's going to change this year. I think that I would agree with the former speaker or previous speaker a little bit about raising the sales tax for property tax relief and maybe some of the unintended consequences of who we're trying to help and who that hurts. I think with the sunset going into effect and what I've heard from folks that, we reduce the overall sales tax for everybody. There are a lot of people that I talk to that aren't even aware that happened, don't necessarily feel the difference when they go and purchase items. And so that leads me to believe if for some reason the sunset goes into effect and we raise that sales tax back up to the 4.5, would they know then either? And so those are questions that I ask myself when we talk about this.
Representative Casson?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and forgive me if I get a little into the weeds on this one, but there's several things to contemplate when we're talking about something like this. We're in an interesting spot in the state right now where there's a substantial amount of one-time revenue. Currently, we have $331 million of one-time revenue. That's a result of unclaimed property. It's also a result of about $95-ish million in reversions from the state budget that account for $331 million in one-time revenue. Now, as many of you know, there was a bill to use some of that money to pay for the prison, a new prison that was proposed. The bill actually was just a transfer of money into the incarceration construction fund that failed, that would have actually utilized some of that money. So right now, we're still sitting at $331 million. We've passed a few bills, haven't been signed by the governor, to utilize some of that. We have a proposal for 1.25% increase to the inflationary increase to the big three. Right now, as I said, ongoing money is very tight in our state budget. I do think there are some things that we can look at in order to restore some of the cuts that have become priorities for us as legislators, including the library, South Dakota Public Broadcasting, things like that. So I do think there's a path forward without increasing the tax rate back to 4.5%, of which I haven't heard any contemplation of. Where I do think you're going to hear some serious conversations with moving the sales tax rate, and I believe it was mentioned earlier, the federal government, the feds, have indicated that there's probably going to be some sort of a shift in the expansion population and what that FMAP share is going to be. So right now, when you talk about Medicaid expansion, we're at a 90-10 split. So 90% of Medicaid expansion is paid by the federal government and 10% is paid by the state. Every time you adjust by 10%, it's $36 million. So if they were to come back and say, we want to change this at the federal level to, instead of for you states that have expansion, the expansion population, we go to 80-20, we're talking about $36 million. If we go to 70-30, obviously $72 million, so forth and so on. That puts us in a really tough spot, and to the conversation of whether the sales tax rate would have to go up, we would have to explore all options at that point, because we're talking about substantial cuts to all of our state programming, right? I mean, we have a library cut that we're being able to contemplate this year. This would just completely put us in a terrible, terrible spot. Just to kind of give you an idea on why we sit where we sit, and again, I'm just...
Oh, sorry, time's up. Sorry. Oh. Sorry, I think I saw that sign like a long time ago. I apologize. Okay, are there other questions about the budget?
Yeah, Representative Casson just mentioned that there's a 1.25% increase planned for the big three. And I'm just wondering, inflation, depending on how you measure it, is either 2.5% or 3% in the last year, and BFM projects that it'll be about 3% in the future. What good does it do to keep teachers here with a program to subsidize their teacher training if we're already 49th in teacher salaries, or 50th, depend on which year you're looking at? Aren't we just going to lose those people? Can't you find some way to pay people at least as much in purchasing power now as they had last year?
Representative Casson?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Representative Ring. And, you know, as we did this, as I said, we're in an interesting spot where we have a substantial amount of one-time money and very little on the ongoing. I'm not, you know, what we tried to do was start the student teacher stipend program as a one-time funding mechanism this year because we have so much one-time money. On the ongoing, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. If just so everybody knows, to go up 1/4 of a point across the big three, and we categorize the big three as education, so what he's talking about with, you know, with our schools, Medicaid providers, and then state employees, every quarter percent that we go up this year represents about $6 million. So as we were trying to work through the budget, you know, every quarter point comes up to 1 point, you know, as $6 million. So if we were to go to, you know, 1.5%, it's about the same way. Now there was also a reduction in M&R this year, which again is I find to be somewhat troubling as well, where we've gone from 1.75% to 1.25% across the board for maintenance and repair of our buildings, and again, that represents every 0.05% represents $7 million, or 0.25% represents $7 million. So yes, it's really a tough budget year, and it's not, you know, it's not fun to sit up here and say that. And I think hopefully in the future revenues will bounce back, and we can contemplate staying at that inflationary rate.
So now's the time that we will be moving on to discussing education. So for those of you who have questions with regard to education, please feel free to approach the microphones. But I'd like to start off by asking about House Bill 1185. It restricts the use of public funds by school districts for lobbying activity. And generally speaking, you know, we in South Dakota and the state legislature has sort of expressed an interest in local control. And I'm wondering, you know, why is it appropriate to pass this legislation in light of our general preference for local control? So we can start with Representative Schormer.
Thank you. Well, it's an interesting concept. Should your school superintendent come out and lobby the legislature for something on their school's behalf? They're a paid government employee. They're out there lobbying on your dime. This says nobody can come out there that's a state employee and lobby on our dime. It isn't that the lobbyists are working on behalf of some voodoo kind of thing here to lobby us into doing something that would be against the will and the benefit of the citizens of South Dakota. I think the lobbyists do a really good job of giving their perspective, and the good ones will give you the opposite point of view when you ask them. And so when I talk to them, I do that. I have no problem with using state money in a limited way like that to lobby. Again, I don't want to limit teachers, administrators, police. The sheriffs were out there a couple of weeks ago. The police departments were out there a couple of weeks ago. They're out there to lobby to improve what they have access to. That would be against the law under this situation. So it may seem like a reasonable idea, but once you hear the proponent and opponents talk about it, it's probably not the best way to go.
Senator Davis, did you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I'll say a few things. You know, this was wildly unpopular in the House. It never made it over to the Senate. It died on a vote of 28 yes, 40 no. I guess when I am looking for opinions, or I'm looking for feedback on how a bill is going to impact the people the most impacted people, whether it's a bill about education, a bill about law enforcement, I want to hear from the people, the boots on the ground that are going to be affected the most. And my concerns about this legislation would be, are we silencing those people that it's going to affect the most? And so that just gives me great pause, and so I'm glad to see it die.
And Representative Casson?
Yeah, I don't have much more to add than that. This died pretty substantially in the House, and if you listen to the debate, was pretty much based upon kind of what Representative Shorma mentioned, where, we had county commissioners, we have state's attorneys, we have sheriffs, we have police associations who all have lobbyists. Again, folks, you got to remember, we're a citizen legislature. I work in higher education fundraising administration. Senator Davis is a CRNA. Representative Shorma owns a business. We don't know all things. We're not all knowing. And so this idea that lobbying or lobbyists are bad is something that we kind of need to take it a notch down. Yeah, I would assume there's probably some bad actors, as there's bad actors in everything. But as a citizen legislature, you need to have voices of other people to understand what's going on, that understand what their profession is. The librarian from Vermillion is sitting right in front of us. If I want to understand what's going on from at a library standpoint, I can call him, right? I mean, that's how we have to do this, because we're not all knowing. We need these folks in order to understand how to make an educated decision on what we're doing. So if we're going to silence the voice of one group at the expense of all these other groups, it just seemed like not exactly the right thing to do.
If I can add one more thought, contrary to what the rumors and the speculation that we hear about what lobbyists are doing with our federal representatives and so on, palms aren't being greased by lobbyists at the state legislature. It's just not happening. That doesn't mean that they won't support them with local efforts and so on, but that's a different situation. There's no funds coming from major organizations that are lobbying hard to the legislators.
Do we have further questions about education?
Good morning. My name is Bryce Mayrose. I'm the parent of 4 young men in Vermillion schools, and I'm a member of the Vermillion Library Board. I'm very concerned about HB 1239, which explicitly removes protections for schools, libraries, teachers, librarians. The bill's supporters claim that it's necessary to protect minors from harmful materials, but if that's the goal, there are far, far better ways to do it than by threatening educators with criminal prosecution. I want to thank you, Representative Caston and Shorma, for voting against it in the House. Senator Davis, I want to ask, can we rely on your opposition in the Senate if it gets to the floor, and in your caucus as well? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I'm waiting to hear the debate in Senate Judiciary. I think that committee is going to take a little bit different lens when they look at the questions and analyze the bill, because as you noted, we're talking about increasing penalties and things like that. So when this went through the House, it went to Education Committee, and so I think they looked at it through a different lens. And so I'm looking forward to hearing the Senate debate. I am going to have a hard time supporting this as it currently stands. And part of that just relates to the fact of we passed legislation requiring libraries to set policies in place. I'm also worried about how does this actually get enforced. In some of our community libraries that are open to the public, you have children's sections, you have adult sections. How does that librarian police the 6-year-old from going and grabbing a book off the other shelf? I have a lot of questions. I'm looking forward to hearing those answers. I'm hoping they get answered in the debate. And so currently, as it stands, I don't know how I'm going to support this, so thank you.
Representative Casson.
Folks, we've had some really outrageous bills in the state legislature this year, and this probably is the most outrageous bill that we've had, okay? I can't tell you how this is an embarrassment to the state legislature, of the bill that actually reached the House floor, that this is one we contemplated. Understanding, listen, I'm a parent of a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. I do not want inappropriate books coming home with my kids. I don't. I don't want them seeing pornography. I don't want that. So the idea that I'm somehow not wanting to protect kids is, quite frankly, crazy. What this bill does nothing to impact what books are coming home in the library. That's not what this bill does. If that was the intent of what we were doing, then that would have been the bill. And there are ways that you can do this. There are ways that have been talked about to do this, that talks about what books are allowed. This bill talks about sending librarians to jail to set a pathway to criminalize librarians, of all people, and other folks that work because of something that, a mistake that was made or this and that. We're talking about, for the lawyers, we're talking about strict liability and things like that. Again, if the intent is, and I think there's some good intent in this, the way it was brought, was to keep harmful material out of the hands of minors. Great intent, something we should be working on. Everybody believes in that. This bill completely does not do that. This bill creates a pathway to criminalize librarians. Again, embarrassing.
Are there other questions about education? Are there other questions about education? About education? Okay. Judge Rush?
One of the things that I was proudest of the time in the legislature was the fact that we were able to hold higher education tuition level. I'm gathering from what I'm hearing that that's probably not something that's going to be feasible anymore. Is that your read on that?
Yeah, well, thank you, Senator. Any more is a long time. This year, it's tough, but I don't think that the appetite for that is any different than it has been. My hope is that we can do some things from an economic development standpoint and a continued growth standpoint to continue to grow the economy in South Dakota so we have more money available to do that again. So.
I would just add that, the 3 to 4 years, I'm trying to remember, of the tuition freezes that we were able to do, significantly made us, or has helped currently. That was not for nothing. If you look around our surrounding states, we are considerably more affordable for students to come here. So those 3 to 4 years of budget of tuition freezes that we did have helped keep our overall tuition lower. And so in the region, we are a very attractive place for students, an affordable place for students to come and get their education. I echo what Representative Shorma said. I'm hopeful in the future we can reinstate and keep doing things like that, but it wasn't all for nothing. When I've had conversations with folks at USD, when it talks about enrollment, we are seeing some of those numbers increase. And so I think that's a good thing and a good sign that the work that we did there is helping.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Rush, and you should be proud of that. And I think everybody in this room should be proud of this. The fact that South Dakota is the #1 most affordable state higher education system in the country. And a lot has to do with those tuition freezes that we've been able to do over the last, the first year was done by the regents themselves. The last 3 years, we actually funded those. So something that we should all be proud of and something we should be striving to bring back, and hopefully we can.
So now is the time that we're going to move into discussions about South Dakota elections and voting. And I wanted to start by asking about SJR 503, which would amend the state constitution to reiterate the requirement that you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote. I guess my question my question is whether you sense that resolution is a necessity, and also are there any concerns about this potentially chilling the willingness of people to get to the polls? And we can start with you, Representative Shormer, if you have thoughts on this.
Sure. So, no, I'm not in favor of having non-U.S. citizens vote in state or federal elections. I think we're electing representatives to represent us as citizens. So it's pretty simple to me. I don't know that we necessarily need an additional law to do that. Maybe we do. Maybe that's why they're bringing this. I'm not sure. I don't think we voted on that yes. Oh, yes, I did too. I was
61 to 5.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I voted in support of that. They don't have a right or standing to vote in elections. Now, people that don't have residency, maybe I'll wait with that. That's probably another question, follow up on that. Thanks.
Senator Davis?
I don't have a whole lot more to add. I think we can all agree that, just like when you vote for us, you got to prove that you're a resident of District 17. So I supported this. It's been a while since we voted on this, so I don't remember all the ins and outs.
You haven't voted on it.
No, it's Senate.
Oh, we had the same one.
Yeah,
SJR.
yeah, it's a Senate resolution. Yeah.
Which one? Wait, House Joint Resolution 5003, right? Yep. HJR.
The question, it was
Oh,
a
no, it was SJR 503.
Senate resolution.
Oh, then we haven't voted on it, though.
Well, the Senate voted on it.
We got competing, both chambers have some agreement on or are contemplating this issue, so that's what we're talking about right now. We're confused about the numbers. I don't know the details of the other language and what the differences are, so I apologize, I can't speak to that. But just generally speaking, we expect you to be a District 17 resident to vote for us, and just to put it in perspective, and so I don't see why we wouldn't do this too.
I don't want to jump into the mind of the person asking the question, but the way it was phrased, maybe I just messed up, is really about this issue of that's already the law. And so why is there a necessity to amend the Constitution? I mean, do you feel like the constitutional amendment is a significant issue to consider?
My guess, again, I would just I'm guessing it's a clarity question. Again, this has been a while since we debated this. I don't remember the details, but it makes sense to me.
Okay. Questions from the floor on voting and elections?
Hello. So there have been about 10 bills introduced this session attacking the initiative process. These bills make it harder for South Dakotans to exercise a constitutional right and make it more likely that only well-funded groups will be able to utilize the process in the future. I'm just really frustrated about this. Since 2017, there have been 30 of these bills enacted by the legislature. So Representatives Casson and Shoreham, I'd like to know why you voted in favor of decreasing the amount of time to gather signatures when the only argument made in favor was giving opponents more time to sue circulators and sponsors. I'd like to know why you're requiring circulators to gather signatures from every senatorial district when we do not require that of statewide candidacy campaigns. I'd like to know why you voted in favor of creating a 60% vote requirement, even though voters have rejected that measure twice in the last 8 years. And Senator Davis, I'd like to know where you stand on these bills. I'd also like to invite you to a little event that we're holding on Monday where we'll be talking about these bills, 6:30 at the library, just to share sort of what the effect these bills actually are having at the ground level. I don't think it always matches the intent in the legislature. Thank you.
Can we start with the representatives? Representative Sharma, you want to speak to these?
Well, I know that South Dakotans love to let their voices be heard through amendments on the ballot measures. And unfortunately, South Dakota has become a beta site for testing national issues at a lower cost. So they're proposing them as constitutional amendments. And when constitutional amendments are passed, we're stuck with them. Good, bad, or otherwise, the wording you may agree with, you may not agree with, it doesn't matter. The legislature can't touch them. So, making it more difficult for outside entities to come to the state, I think, is the goal. Whether those things that are being proposed are actually having that impact, we'll see. We'll see. I don't want to take ballot measures away from the voters. I think it's their right to bring something. South Dakota's been very good at allowing that process to happen. We've had a lot of constitutional amendments and ballot measures. I think the Constitution should be more difficult to adjust. It is our document that is the rules of how South Dakota believes it should function. And it's done pretty well for us. So in my mind, constitutional amendments are probably a different standard from getting on the ballot than just a ballot measure.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I'll just make a couple points. One, kind of similar to Representative Shorma, I do think the Constitution deserves a higher standard to be changed, and that's why I'm consistent in my votes regarding that. I think what the Constitution does and what its intention is to do is create a framework for government, and I spoke about this 2 weeks ago, and why I've supported these measures. It's not a policy document. Although there is some policy in there, I don't believe it is a policy document. I'd also push back a little bit on the notion that all of this money is what is actually driving success on the ballot. I think South Dakotans are really smart. I think we really study our ballot measure, and I think we make informed decisions. The two ballot measures that had success this year were work requirements for Medicaid expansion, of which I don't think a single dollar was raised, and then RL 21, which was referred to the ballot by the people, which I think in very small dollar amounts. The large money amendments and things like that, where we're talking about large money being brought in, those were failed by the voters. Like I said, RL 21 was referred law that whether you say it passed or failed, it was referred because it wanted to fail, so it failed. And then again, work requirements for Medicaid expansion was the other one that passed, and there wasn't any money spent on that, or very negligible, if any. So I think South Dakotans are very intelligent. I think they do their homework, and I'm very pleased. I think the argument that we bring in all this big money and this big money impacts the way that people vote, I struggle with that.
I don't have a whole lot more to add. I think the representatives made some good points about pros and cons and kind of the sentiment of why these bills are coming forward. Concerns about political money influencing elections, but as Representative Casson said, initiatives that have come repeatedly before, voters seem to be pretty consistent in what their feelings are. Some of these bills that were mentioned are things that would go to the voters, for the voters to decide. And so I'll likely be consistent with my previous votes on this topic. I'm being very general. I understand that when we're talking about this broad topic, but I know there are numerous bills coming over from the House on this topic, and so we'll take them up as they move through the process.
I'd just like to follow up on that question. I certainly appreciate that we don't want to be changing the Constitution for every little thing. I think that goes back to the previous question about putting something that's already like the law of the land, including our entire land, into the Constitution, which you said that you would support. The reason that we've seen so many measures that are coming as constitutional amendments is because we have had the experience over and over again in this state of citizen initiative being pretty much overturned by our legislature. If there were to be an opportunity, whether a bill or an initiated measure that would protect citizen initiative, would you support that so that we do not have to go to the Constitution in order to have our voices heard?
We'll start with Senator Davis.
I don't disagree with the intent of the question. I think that's something, obviously, we want to protect what voters are intending to accomplish. I'm not going to make any promises that I wouldn't, want to tweak language if it's unworkable. Because when an initiated measure, that language is that is it. There's no opportunity to amend or change anything when it's being voted on. Our legislative process allows for 5 different opportunities and checks and balances for things to be changed along the way, public testimony, people to weigh in on, hey, I think there's an unintended consequence, maybe we need to amend or change this on the workability of it to maybe actually achieve the intent. And so sometimes that's why ballot measures fail too, is because the language is so unworkable. I think we saw that in some of the ballot measures this past election season, and that's unfortunate. If we can't get the language right and it's unworkable, then voters are stuck with a choice of, I agree with the intent, but this isn't gonna work, so then now what do I do? And so, I agree with the intent of the question. I'd be curious to see what that language actually looks like.
Representative Casson?
Yeah, great question, thank you. I think the senator made some good points. I also bring up this. I think the thing is, things change over time, and I think there's the ability that we need to change with those changing times. As I mentioned before, our federal delegation has made it pretty clear, and I think that so has so is some of the people at the top of the top of the United States, that there is going to be changes coming to Medicaid expansion. They're coming, and I mean they're basically saying prepare for this. So when we're talking about, all right, so in today's budget, we're talking about, hey, are we going to fund South Dakota Public Broadcasting fully? Are we going to be able to restore some of the library cuts? There's some other things that I think people are very passionate about, and rightfully so. Are we going to be able to restore those cuts? Well, if we are all of a sudden looking at, like, are we going to change with the times? You have you change from a 90-10 split on Medicaid expansion to a 70-30 split on Medicaid expansion. Again, that's a $72 million in ongoing funds that is going to go is a mandatory for Medicaid expansion. And so therefore it makes it very difficult as a legislature to change and pivot based upon what happens at the national level and then taking that to the ballot. So I agree with the intent of the question. I just think as things change, there could be ability sometimes to change with them.
Representative Sharma?
Well, I don't know whether I want to go down this path or not, but I think I will anyway. There are times when the citizens don't really vote on a measure that is what they believe it to be. At the same time, sometimes the legislature, right now, the question is, where are all the landowner protections for people that are being affected by this pipeline? Referendum 21 took away a mountain of protections that we put in place. Were they all correct? No. They could have been modified in the next legislative session, but that bill's gone. So is it respectful then to not put any more landowner protections on the books if the citizens just said, in every county, with one exception, that we shouldn't protect the landowners, let them fend for themselves, it's their land. So sometimes you have to make exceptions to something that has passed as a ballot measure because certain things were overlooked when they were passed, or maybe the fact that eminent domain was not in that bill, but that's what people thought they were voting on. Now, you can argue whether it was or it wasn't, but I believe that it was not. It wasn't written in the bill. So, there was a vote that was different than what the members of the citizens of the state voted on. So, should we fix it or not?
Okay, so this is the time when we are going to switch our attention to property rights and taxes. And I have a question from the floor here that I wasn't sure where to put it in. Budget or here, so it's going here. Property taxes are a serious issue, especially for retired people. House Bill 1235 and Senate Bill 216 propose to solve the problem with tax limitations. At the same time, federal money for states and counties is declining. How might the legislature solve this problem without bankrupting counties that have only property taxes to finance roads, bridges, and mental health, et cetera? So we can start with Senator Davis.
It's a good question. I don't have a great answer. To my knowledge, that trying to increase this or trying to control the growth rate is, obviously I don't think there's any talk about the state coming in and backfilling any lost revenue or helping backfill budgets. And so, yes, budgets are going to have to adjust. And sometimes, and that is what is driving the need right now for the property tax. Property taxes get decided based on the local budgets in the need. I'm not saying that our local school board and that our county is flush with cash, because I know they're not. And I'm not saying that they're spending unwisely. The reality is people are feeling a pinch. There is a real need for relief. And as Representative Casson said earlier, there are going to be some hard decisions and shifts and people that are going to shift. There's just going to be shifts. There's no way to address it without that happening. And so it becomes a matter of how do you make whatever shift it is tolerable and livable. And that's the best answer I can give.
Representative Sharma?
Well, I don't have too much to add. It's a very complicated problem, and shifting is, if you're shifting, then you're just taking it from one bucket and putting it in another. What we really need is to take a look at the whole structure. It's not an easy thing to solve. That's why we end up at the legislature. They end up doing nothing instead of doing something. There's a proposal from the governor that adjusts property at a very low percentage. I think Representative Casson will be talking about that a little bit as well. That means somebody with a $100,000 home will have to pay at 3% increase, if it's held to a 3% increase, will have to pay something like $200 or $300 more. But a homeowner whose property went from $1 million to $1.5 million because of the demand for that kind of a home, his tax increase is only 3%. Is that fair to the whole scheme of where tax dollars are going to come from? So it kind of pits the low income and moderate income against the rich. So it's a tough one.
Representative Casson?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Very important topic, something we hear about a lot about, and something that needs to be contemplated very carefully. So I will just go right down the list. I believe there's three property tax bills that are still alive. House Bill 1235 we heard on the House. This limited counties to 2.5%, down from 3%. Basically, the comments were made. It's a punch in the face to the counties, school districts, and cities that are spending too much money. I don't know if we have any county commissioners sitting in this room today, but I know we have some that generally come to these things. The idea that the counties are flush with cash is crazy. If we're gonna do property tax off the backs of county or cutting county budgets, I find that to be an interesting experiment, and I don't think it's going to work very well. The only way that these things work is if there's an increase in revenue into the equation. If you're just going to simply say, hey, you're going to do this or do that, then it's just a shift onto something else. Senate Bill 191 was another one that's alive. That was heard on the Senate floor. It was heard last week. That one has and I've had people who have emailed me in favor of this, and again, I think there's some merit in what they're trying to do by limit valuations, because some of us have seen our valuations go up substantially, which have increased our property taxes. So I think there is some merit in looking at this. This particular bill, though, has the unique ability to both shift property taxes from higher income individuals in basically the Black Hills and Sioux Falls who are building these big houses to lower income and more moderate homes in other areas who aren't seeing these higher valuations. So you're both shifting from maybe what would consider higher income to lower income individuals, while also at the same time being the largest single tax shift that we've ever seen in the state's history from owner occupied to ag land. So you will see not only a shift from, I said, higher earning or higher valued in homes to lower valued homes, but also the largest tax shift to ag land. So it has the unique distinction of doing both of those things. The governor's proposal, I believe, is Senate Bill 216, which is also still alive. I think presents more of a rifle shot at this, where you're actually trying to get at the point of, there are individuals, and I think Representative Shorma mentioned this, you know, the individuals on fixed incomes and the individuals who their property taxes are putting them in a risk of losing their homes. That's who I'm very concerned about. And those, when I get those emails, that's what I'm very touched by. Individuals in, you know, in the Black Hills whose valuation's gone up by $500,000, you know, understandably, they're upset about their property taxes, but it's the individuals who are living in modest homes and their property taxes continue to rise, and they're just being forced out of their homes. I believe he does try and address some of those things in his bill. I think there's good merits to all of this, and that's why I think there's maybe going to be a summer study, again, summer study, and Senator Bolden can tell you how effective some of those can be, on this thing, because it is such a large topic.
Okay, I want to turn it over to the floor now. Are there other questions out there about property rights and taxes?
Hi, guys. Leslie Garish here. I live here in Vermillion. Okay, so this isn't, well, I just want to bring up maybe the Voldemort of, and channel my Hermione Granger here, because every time we all chat and every time the commissioners chat, it's just, there's no money. There's not another revenue source. So let's talk about the Voldemort that is income tax. Please tell me your opinion on it, and may I suggest, if you ever think of it, we might have a wonderful consultant in former Representative Ray Ring. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm totally against an income tax.
Yeah, there's a lot of resistance in the legislature to even raise the sales tax 0.25%. So the political reality of even getting an income tax is pretty much dead on arrival. And I would just argue, I occasionally work in Iowa, and so I know what that feels like to have to pay income tax on the wages that I earn when I occasionally work PRN in some Iowa facilities. That's the reason when we don't have an income tax, we are very attractive to businesses and employers that are looking for a tax-friendly state, and that helps us grow our economic development, which helps bring industry and things like that will help lower property tax or contribute property taxes and help grow our local economy. And all of those things are important. The Dakota Dunes area, which is part of this district, would not be what it is without essentially Iowans, tax evading Iowans that want to live on the South Dakota side. And that is okay, because you know what? The property evaluations for Union County, the revenue that they generate off that area is good for that county. That helps that county survive. I get it. There are a lot of opinions about this. It's just not popular, and it's something that our state helps make our state attractive and different from others.
Senator Davis, just as a brief follow-up on that, I do hear what you're saying about attracting business and raising money, but if we were attracting businesses and raising enough money that way, would we still be in, I mean, it seems like we have a budget problem, so it's not working. Like, is there another way to bring in revenue?
Well, I think part of our budget problem too is decrease in revenues, obviously, as you're indicating. The legislature felt strongly about cutting the sales tax, which cut about $110 million a couple of years ago. If that revenue was still here, I don't know that we'd be seeing the budget issues we are now. And so at the time, I was very hesitant about doing that sales tax decrease because of the wisdom of appropriators that had been there 20-some years, like Senator Bolin, worried about what would happen in the decrease in revenue, and the other members of the legislature felt different. And so that's why I supported putting that sunset in there, so that we have a way out if we need to, so.
Representative Casson?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you. Yes, I think the idea that an income tax would be even remotely contemplated in the state legislature, it's not going to happen. And I will not support an income tax in South Dakota as long as I'm an elected official. What I would say is a couple of things as we start, where we start talking about county funding. County funding is something where we as legislators should be, should feel guilty about. The county funding is death by 1,000 lashes and death by, unfunded mandates from the state that have continued to just decimate what our counties are able to do. And even so, capping them at 3%, and now this idea with 1235 that we're now going to cap you at 2.5%. When there is growth within your county, and we're able to actually capitalize on it. Oh, but no, you can only go 3% in the county. You can't go even if you are experiencing growth of 5 or 6%. Oh, no, the legislature says you can only do 3%. And with this new House Bill 1235, oh, no, now you can only do 2.5%. So I am sympathetic to the counties in this idea of growth and their inability to increase their budgets and where the dollars are. I think there's some things that should be done, and like I said, it's death by 1,000 cuts, and we need to start trying to change some of those things so that there are dollars. But as it pertains to an income tax, I'm not going to support that.
Are there other questions about property and taxes from the floor?
I don't mean to be taken up so much, but what people are talking about property taxes, they're also talking about bond issues and opt-outs that people are paying. And I don't know what proportion of the property taxes are really bond issues and opt-out, which people had either voted for or had an option to vote for. Do any of you know what proportion of the taxes are really property taxes, and how much are these other things that the people didn't object to?
Thank you for the question, Senator Rush, and I'm going to just answer based upon some of the things as I've dug into this issue the last week. So if you actually, and again, I know we have some really smart individuals in this room, so please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but as I understand it, if you actually take out all of what Senator Rush is talking about and you actually just go on to what in property tax increase throughout the state, I actually think the property tax increases actually track pretty much with inflation, so 3-4% across the board, across the state. There are what you're seeing is his spikes in certain areas where they are getting really where the valuations are going up. But as far as the property taxes as it goes, I believe it's pretty much tracking with inflation all the way across the state at 4% or something like that.
First of all, I heard my name used, but my hearing aids don't always work, and I don't know exactly what was said about me.
It's all
but I do want to point out, and I'm not going to say the words IT, whatever. I do want to point out that South Dakota's state aid to education as a percent of total local school spending is one of the lowest in the nation. State aid to local governments, period, is very low relative to other states. When we start talking about property tax, I think it's important to keep in mind that what you're really doing is you're putting the local governments on the spot, better term probably, in a bind, because they need to pay for certain things, and the state isn't helping them. Instead, you're putting a cap, it's like pushing on a balloon, and what happens as a result is that we may have low taxes overall, but we also have a lot of spending, and the opt-outs show that there's a lot of spending that people would be willing to pay for if you would just consider changing the tax structure in a way that's meaningful instead of something like the governor's property tax bill.
I think he makes some great points. I mean, I think he's right, and I think if you listen to my comments, that's exactly what I was trying to say, is that there's no way that you're gonna have meaningful tax relief unless you infuse more revenue into this equation. Otherwise, he's right, it's just a shift. It's just a shift from owner occupied to ag land to commercial. And understand, commercial and other, that's just not commercial buildings. That's if you own a rental house, that's gonna be passed on to your renters. So you start shifting, that's all it is a tax shift, unless you're willing to interject or inject more revenue into the equation. And he's exactly right. And that's why the only true tax cut, or the only true property tax proposal that would have actually funded the tax proposal was brought forth by, now the lieutenant governor and then somebody else, and I don't even know who pitched it. It had ultimately died on the House side, which would have raised the sales tax in order to offset the property tax. So you would have raised the sales tax in order to do this. Obviously, I think there was problems with that we could contemplate, but that was the only serious proposal that would have substantially lowered owner-occupied property taxes, while at the same time not doing what he's doing, which was further depressing local government or school districts and their budgets. So I think that's what needs to be done, is figure out a way to do this in a way that does exactly that, where we aren't shifting, but we're actually paying for it.
Just one last question on the property issue for Senator Davis. It's a question from a citizen. Will you support House Bill 1052 if it makes it to the Senate floor? And what is your sort of justification for your vote? That's the eminent domain, the one that prohibits the exercise of eminent domain for a pipeline that carries carbon oxide.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear the debate. I'm curious to see if it comes out of committee with any amendments. I have concerns about why we're carving out eminent domain on one specific project. And like I said in a previous Cracker Barrel, my concerns about how it's currently written is what happens if they get a common carrier status? What if this is actually eligible for eminent domain, but yet we have this law that says that conflicts with that? I have concerns about that, and so I'm going to be waiting to make a decision to see what the debate looks like, what's the form of the bill when it comes out of committee. It's up on Monday, so we'll see it soon.
Thank you. So for this section, we are going to begin talking about health and social services issues. And I wanted to start by talking about House Bill 1132, which is going to be in front of the Senate Health and Human Services, I think next week. This is the bill that would provide eligibility for child care assistance, so it's increasing the level at which you're eligible for that assistance. What are your thoughts on that bill? And other than that, what is being done to assist with affordability for child care in South Dakota? And we'll start with Senator Davis.
Thanks. This is a topic that I've spent a lot of time researching, working on, going to, especially outside of the legislative session. And I'll be supporting this bill when it comes to Senate Health and Human Services. Part of what this bill is doing is allowing child care workers to be eligible for assistance, income assistance. So a lot of these workers are making very low wages, $12, $15 an hour if they're lucky. And so if for whatever reason they meet the income guidelines to be eligible for assistance, and they're also helping staff the facility, we need workers in this area. And so what you're seeing right now is people that are falling between the cracks. They can't go get the job, maybe a job like this, where they might just make a little too much to meet those income guidelines. And so we need to do something to help support the workforce for this industry. We need to do something in this industry, period. It's vital for workforce of all industries. It's important for safety and well-being of children to have, and parents to have access to safe, quality care. The Department of Social Services talked to me on Thursday and kind of gave me their quick spiel about why they'll be opposing this and why they don't like it, because they have a pool of money and there's only so much to go around, and they, don't want to start a waiting list of people, and they're utilizing all the money that they have right now. Well, I guess I just would say, let's see if there's a need. Let's see if this change creates a long waiting list, and then we know what the need really is out there. I had a bill from a constituent, a graduate student right now. Students are, I'll save it, I'll talk about later.
Representative Casson?
Yes, thank you, and very good question. And I was proud to support this bill. I'm sure Representative Shorman was proud to support this bill, that we were able to support this bill as well, and we were able to get it passed out of the House. To the senator's point about the appropriations piece of this, a lot of these bills, when they're supposedly having a fiscal impact, we're supposed to be sent to appropriations in order for us to contemplate how they impact the overall budget before we ultimately pass them out. So they essentially get two sets of eyes on them. They get the policy committee, which is her, then you get the appropriator set of eyes on it. I'm not necessarily saying DSS is wrong on this. What we could understand, just kind of looking at it and whether we should take this up in appropriations and have it sent to us, is there aren't enough people even utilizing this program yet. So the fiscal impact is basically negligible because we have the dollars available, and then if we do run out of dollars, then we actually did fully utilize the program, which that they're saying it's fully utilized. That maybe is a little different information than we got. That they're not fully utilizing the program right now, and then if they did fully utilize it with the dollars that are currently available for it, then they would just start a waiting list. So again, I think anything we can do to help child care is very important, and again, was proud to support this bill.
Okay, other questions on health and social services from the floor?
To get out my notes. I can't give lectures, let alone ask questions without my notes. Thanks, everybody. My name's Sarah Lampert. I live in Clay County, and I wanted to get some clarification on Medicaid and Medicaid expansion. So we've heard some of your thoughts on the importance to prioritize low-income people, on concerns about constitutional amendments, and about our budget. Our state supported Medicaid expansion 56%, Union County 54%, Clay County 68%. And so I guess I'm trying to understand your support for House Resolution 5001, which would propose a constitutional amendment, is my understanding of this, that would authorize the end of Medicaid expansion if the federal government reduced its share of the funding below 90%. So I just want clarification on your position on Medicaid expansion and your constituents' support for Medicaid expansion.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I'd be glad to clarify. So what this amendment says, and so everybody's clear here, what this amendment says, and again, this is being voted on by the people, so I don't want to, again, this will be decided by you again, because it is a constitutional amendment. What the amendment says is, in the event that Medicaid expansion, if the FMAP changes from 90 to 10, as we talked about earlier, in the event that the FMAP was to change from 90 to 10, when you voted on Medicaid expansion, that was the FMAP. So that's what you voted on, was at 90% and 10%. If the FMAP was to change, so the feds were to change and say 80-20, 70-30, 60-40, whatever you would, that the legislature would have the ability, it's not guaranteed that we would do this, would have the ability to contemplate changes. So it's not a given. It is not like all of a sudden, oh, if you change it to 80/20, Medicaid expansion goes away. That's not it. It's saying, hey, if this changes, you are now giving the legislature the opportunity to say, listen, okay, we want South Dakota Public Broadcasting, we want the library, we want the other state agencies. We understand that it's $36 million every 10% that we shift, so $72 million, so forth and so on. So we get to the point where we basically are cutting the entire budget. We'd actually rather just maybe focus on, let's focus on what Medicaid originally started as, which is, children, pregnant women, and the other, what a traditional population is, and not the expanded population, just to allow something. But it's not a trigger. There is not a trigger there. It just allows the ability then to have that conversation.
Senator Davis, did you want to speak to this issue?
Sure, I'll just speak a little bit. I supported Medicaid expansion with the current system because we could afford it right now. I do have concerns about if the federal support changes. I mean, just look at the budget year we're in now. Again, I appreciate the appropriators' comments about if we shift to a 70-30 or an 80-20, that's an extra $36 million that we need to come up with. And just to put it in perspective, the cuts to South Dakota Public Broadcasting were $6 million. I'm sorry?
3.6.
3.6? Thank you, Mr. Appropriator. So, imagine how devastating, think about what we'd have to do to make that possible. So I think this provides some flexibility that in the what-if scenario, that if things change, we need to be able to respond and pivot. Oh, and I would just add again, this is part of the problem of speaks to the issue of putting policy in the Constitution.
Yeah, generally, I'm not a big fan of bills that are brought because something could happen in the future. And we need to protect ourselves for something that could happen in the future. In this case, it gives us a vehicle to be able to do something that it sounds like could be happening in the future. If it doesn't, and I'm an optimist. I don't know what next year's revenues are going to be. I don't know what the year after that economy in South Dakota is going to look like. We could be seeing a deeper dip in sales tax revenues. We could see an increase in sales tax revenues. There's just as much possibility of one versus the other right now. On the real estate tax side, property tax side, same thing. We could see some, one of the advantages that South Dakota has is we're a very attractive place to come and move to. The disadvantage is that it drives house values up in those couple of very popular spots to move to through the roof. So, you kind of have your cake and eat it too. You can't have all this growth without impacting something. So we gotta figure out how to deal with that, and that's what we're faced with, and it's not easy.
So for the last few minutes that we're together, we're going to open up the floor for open discussion. I have two questions from constituents here that I wanted to open with, and then we'll turn it over to the floor. The first is the request of whether you would support a resolution in support of Ukraine and NATO.
I guess I would look to see what the language looks like. I'll be honest, my focus on national issues right now is not a high priority for me at the moment, as I've got bills and 9 days left in the legislature to get things going. So thank you for the question.
Representative Casson?
Yeah, very much the same, folks. Resolutions and things like that are fantastic, but I mean, we have some real serious things that we're contemplating here, and I understand it's serious, but as it impacts us as state legislatures and things like that, I think a lot of these things are done, and frankly, we see a lot of these, and they're basically somebody wants to make a point and to do this, and I don't know. I sometimes have a problem with the resolution process myself.
Representative Sharma?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I have a relative that, well, I believe they've recently moved out of the Ukraine, but they were up in the northwest corner where the fighting was not located. So and I've been in the Ukraine. It's a lovely country. It's beautiful. It's not like fighting a war in Afghanistan, where you have pockets of population with nothing in between. Everything's spread out across the Ukraine, so lots of people are in the path as the soldiers march in. I'm in support of Ukraine ending the war, and I'm in support of Russia ending the war. Well, yeah, they can come to a conclusion of ending the war. They can agree to something.
Okay, so I think,
It doesn't mean they have to give the house away. It
yeah,
just means that
yeah, so
the
let's,
conversation.
I think the issue is a national issue, and it's really important to make sure that we're paying attention to the things that these representatives have control over. And so I want to ask one other question that's related to a local issue, which is from a constituent. When will the people of McCook Lake get assistance from the state?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and we spoke about this 2 weeks ago, and since then, unfortunately, the bill that would have impacted the lake restoration, I understand that's not all of that, and I understand that's not going to help any of the homeowners in McCook Lake. But it did die in the Appropriations Committee last week, and it's kind of sad to see that. I do think that it did put the intended pressure on Game Fish and Parks to get the scope of work out and get some dates set and some dollar figures out to the folks of McCook Lake to help clean up the lake. And again, that's just one step in a cleanup process, but that lake is a huge piece of that entire community. So unfortunately, the bill that we had done and worked really hard on, and I thought had garnered more support this year, obviously because of the just terrible flooding event that occurred there. We had some support, just didn't garner enough support to pass.
Yeah, that Game Fish and Parks is working on lake restoration. We were uncomfortable that the scope of work may not go big enough and why do we care about the reclamation of the lake instead of the property owners that were impacted? Well, we care about both. If the property values are substantially diminished because the lake's not a lake right now, it's impacting the property values. If they have a property, their property values have decreased. We talked about escalating property values in some of these other areas. In their case, it's de-escalating property values because of the flooding. So that's not the only answer, but if the lake is no longer a lake, that impacts them. If there's not a flood mitigation plan, which needs to be done and redone, that impacts them. If they don't know how they could be impacted in the future if a 1,000-year flood again comes in a few years, then that impacts them. But that doesn't fix their short-term obligations that they have. Many of them, for whatever, well, I know the reason. They were advised that they were above the 100-year floodplain, so they wouldn't necessarily need to have flood insurance. Not all of them opted to not have flood insurance, but those that didn't have flood insurance may no longer have a home, may no longer have the land to build a home on, and they still have a mortgage. So it's terrible. It's a terrible situation. We don't have a vehicle at the state to help them with their local, with their personal issue. That doesn't mean that we're not working on something to try to put in an emergency disaster fund that eventually we could avoid that in the future, but we don't have any dollars there now.
Senator Davis?
Yeah, I would appreciate the question. Again, this is not a priority that is lost upon the three of us. We continue to work on it. I understand people are frustrated. As Representative Shorma said, we don't have a vehicle to provide individual assistance, cut individual checks to people that were impacted. We don't have a program like that in South Dakota like FEMA does, like the federal government does. The individual assistance to cut a check to an individual severely impacted. That doesn't, as Representative Shorma said, that doesn't mean we're not talking about it. We just haven't had the time to do it in the last 6 months because other things are taking priority, and we're working to, again, we saw an opportunity to try to get Game Fish and Parks, who owns the lake, to hold up to their end of the deal and clean it to it and help us restore it, take the cars and the debris and all of that stuff out of there, repair the shoreline. That's something that we could do and try to put pressure on in the immediate time frame. And you know, we're doing our best, and just because the bill failed doesn't mean that we won't continue to put pressure on them. We have talks with them, and we'll continue to have talks with them. And I know they are continuing to hear from people in the community. It is going to take a long time to recover from this, and I wish we could make it all happen faster, but it is truly not lost on us. I have friends that live on the lake, friends that live in the community, and I hear from them all the time. And so it is, again, not lost on us and something that we are continuing to work on. It is unfortunately taking longer than everybody wants it to.
Representative Castle.
Yeah, I would just add a couple things to that, and I'm sorry, I don't want to take up too much time speaking on this, but I am very passionate about this issue and this McCook Lake issue and the residents, because what ended up happening was it exposed some gaps in where we are as a state, in our emergency response. You know, I don't know if any of you saw last night, but there was a fire that started up kind of by where Senator Davis lives, up on the kind of to the northeast of here. There was a wildfire, or a fire, not a wildfire, but a fire that was ultimately put out, but could have actually impacted a significant amount of folks here. And again, when you kind of sit here and think about it, it's like what can be the state response and what can we do? And it is very limited. But at the same token, if we're going to make large-scale changes, it's going to be more than just the three of us sitting up here who are sitting here talking about McCook Lake. If we're going to make a large-scale change to our emergency management or emergency response plan at the state level, we need buy-in from several people, several different agencies, several different folks, several different executive branch people, other legislators, and so that's going to take some time, and I'm committed to working on that, because I'm very passionate about this. You know, you spend so much time down in McCook Lake and you see the devastation that occurred to those folks, and it just tears your heart out. And so we are committed to making this happen. It's going to take us a little bit of time, and at the end of the day, it might not help those folks. It might not, but what happened to them, unfortunately, has, illustrated the gaps that we currently have, and if it does happen again, maybe we'll have a plan for them. But if it happens to somebody else across the state, hopefully we'll be able to help those folks.
Okay, are there other questions from the floor?
Yes, my name is Thomas McGill, and I think the big elephant in the room today, we need to raise revenue in the state, in America today. And my question is, how will you react to the potential, after 35 days, America has declined. America today, the Beltway, they say politics is all local. The Beltway has hit Vermillion, South Dakota today. And my question is today, what do you foresee how you're going to handle that? I guess my question is, we need more general revenue to offset the problems that are going to happen. But I'm just wondering if you see what's happening in DC today, it's going to have a major effect on localism in so many ways. And it's time to start focusing on that. I think you're doing all a great job. But I just want to make that point. we are in massive trouble.
Okay, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Senator Davis, we'll start with you. I think the question is basically how are you going to react to what the national political scene is doing to local revenue?
Okay, well, thanks for the comments and the question. I think what we can do as a legislator or an individual legislator is recognize what levers can we pull? What can we actually have? What is actually possible? And where can we emphasize that? And, you know, the biggest thing is in my opinion, economic development. And you know, I'm sure there are others that think there be other ideas on how to increase revenues and respond, but also living with what is possible. And so that's something that I think as a state we try to do good. We've emphasized more in the last recent years on an organization, public-private partnership called South Dakota Trade. And things like that. I think those are good things that we're doing. And again, you know, it's a definitely hard question to answer, and we're not going to solve it in one day. But that's a lever that I think we can realistically pull to try to inject new revenue into our state.
Representative Casson.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and ironically, you stole my closing to what I was going to close this whole thing out with. But, so I'll just say it now. You know, what you're seeing across our state, and unfortunately in the state legislature manifesting itself, is you're starting to see a not in my backyard kind of thing, where we have completely, where it is a real fight against economic development. It's a real fight against growth. It's a real fight of things that I ran for the legislature. We're over-regulating everything. If you're following the legislature this year, it's regulate everything. More government is the answer. I mean, I don't know what platform we thought we were running on, but we're certainly not following it this year. So there's this not in my backyard. We don't like this construction project. We don't like this economic development project. We don't like this infrastructure project. So as you start to have that as and again, I think this is at the national level as well. You start to see this on a large scale throughout the state, and you're stymieing economic development. You're stymieing growth. And what you end up happening is, for the reasons I ran, we're not there anymore. We're there to fight again. We're there fighting a battle against things that we shouldn't have to fighting against, which is over-regulation and government, and more government. It's not the answer. If we're going to do this, it's continued growth. It's going back to the reason why I ran, and that's continued opportunities for future generations of South Dakotans. And I think you hit the nail right on the head, and I think that's exactly the problem. And I remain laser focused on trying to vote on things that help future generations of South Dakotans, and not try and stymie and stop everything that any progress that we made up to this point.
Rep. Sharma, thoughts on revenue generation?
Well, it's interesting. The same group that is against raising revenue or making cuts, they voted against making a cut the other day on reducing the dollars for a veteran to place a tombstone on his non-state veterans cemetery. He wants to be buried next to his kinfolk as opposed to being in that state cemetery. They voted against it to start with. Now, the first time I've ever seen a complete red board in the House of Representatives after we talked about it and said, look, this is the last thing we can do for a veteran. We can spend $200-300 per tombstone, per plaque, per whatever, to place a tombstone on somebody that didn't have the money. It's not every veteran, it's only those that can't afford that. And after we had a good definition, even the people that were against cutting spending voted in favor of it. So sometimes it's the reality. You're right, Representative Casson. There's a faction that just says, not in my backyard. I'm going to be against everything, and that's not how South Dakota works. We've got to take a look at each individual item and make a decision on, and sometimes all we're doing is modifying the existing thing. You know, with the library, I think we can minimize the impact. If there may be a tiny impact or a small impact, and it doesn't mean it's not going to be painful for, you know, certain aspects of it. But we can minimize what those are if we're willing to talk about it and reach a solution that balances our options.
It's my understanding we have 2 more questions.
Hello, I'm Glenn Marshall from Vermillion, South Dakota. Thank you all for serving our democracy with good hearts. Thank you. So what you mentioned, what we do to the least of these in our population is pretty important. Lutheran Social Services of South Dakota is the primary provider of many key services in our state. Mental health, lots of adoptions, refugee families, etc. A few weeks back, LSS was accused of money laundering and illegal payments by a couple national political voices with promises of funding cuts. In this environment, what can we do, or you do, to make sure South Dakota still serves the most vulnerable among us, orphans, fatherless, refugee, least of these, etc.?
Representative Sharma.
Sure. Well, I'm proud to say that my folks worked through Lutheran Social Services from about 35 years ago until about 20 years ago, sponsoring refugees, legal refugees that were coming to the United States to escape suppression in their countries. Vietnam, post-Vietnam War, Romania, and so on. They do a fantastic job. So I'm not going to be one of those that buys into the idea that Lutheran Social Services is not being run for the proper reasons and roles. So I'll be listening to what kinds of things, accusations are being brought forth to, and if they can prove to me that something like that's happening in South Dakota, we need to address it. But I don't think that means that we have to severely impact Lutheran Social Services as punishment for some location that maybe did something wrong.
Senator Davis.
Sure. I don't know enough about the details about the accusations for LSS. I would say I'm going to lean in a little more on your question about how do we protect these vulnerable populations. I will, I like to think much to sometimes my disappointment, Department of Social Services, Department of Health, I work closely with those departments on a lot of policy and see them in my committees quite frequently. When I think about vulnerable populations, I think we do our best with our budget trying to prioritize vulnerable populations and protecting them. For an example, CSPs. We did some very targeted increases to the SESDACs of the state to ensure their sustainability. And other Medicaid providers weren't exactly excited about that because they are struggling as well. But the reality of it is the payer mix of hospitals, clinics, nursing homes, some people have private insurance, some people are on Medicaid, some people are Medicare. There's different pots coming together to fill the big pot to pay for things. CSPs, our community service providers, the SESDACs of our community, they're pretty much all on Medicaid. There's nobody with private insurance in those facilities, and so they're at a disadvantage. And so I know this may be not exactly addressing your question, but I'm trying to give you an example of there is I do think that we have had opportunities to try to really protect vulnerable populations, and that's an example.
Representative Casson.
Yeah, I don't know much about that, but I do appreciate your efforts and everything that you're doing with Lutheran Social Services and all of our other providers throughout the state, so thank you.
Okay, and there's one more question from the floor.
Well, speaking of vulnerable populations, local control, overregulation, let's talk about House Bill 1259, which is our annual bathroom bill, which targets a vulnerable population of the trans community. It moved out of the House with some very colorful and sometimes not very nice language. Representative Shorma and Representative Casson, you both voted in favor of this bill, so I would like for you guys to address where's the dichotomy of local control, because we are in Vermillion right now, where we also elected a school board which came up with a policy that has 0 situations that have been issues. And Senator Davis, how will you be voting on this, which I think will probably vote it on this coming week? Thank you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
You know, I was contacted by some people in the education industry that said, please give us some guidelines, because there's not a definitive way that we can put a policy in place that satisfies everybody. It just doesn't. So give us some guidelines, and that's what was put forth, and that's what I voted for. By the way, there was another Bill 1260, which dealt with transgenders having transitioned. Can they use their new proclaimed sex on their driver's license? I didn't see how that would harm anybody. Now, it may harm them as an individual if they are treated in a emergency accident and it says that they're a female, but yet that they would use a different medical approach if they were male. I don't know about that. I'm just saying, but that would be their own risk. It wouldn't harm me. It wouldn't harm other people in that way. So it was trying to find a balance between respecting and protecting. So, thank you.
Representative Casson?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, one of the very difficult issues that we tackle amongst many in the legislature, and you know, I had conversations from individuals who both supported the bill and both opposed the bill, and you know, ultimately, I decided that I would support this bill, and yeah, it's a difficult one. I do think there was some. The week before, there was some things that come down, but through executive order dealing with this very similar issue. That you know, I don't know if it impacted the decision, but it certainly had. It certainly started to maybe direct the conversation. So,
And Senator Davis, how are you planning on voting?
Thanks. As always, I will be looking forward to debate and taking input from folks before I make any sort of final decisions. I will say that I'm leaning towards supporting the bill in regards to the fact that, yes, we might not have an issue here, but there is sentiment from others that schools are struggling with navigating these issues on a local basis. And as we've seen this issue, and I've heard from both sides very vocally, it becomes very divisive for communities. And so I've gathered that there are just other communities that are struggling with these decisions on a local level and are looking for guidance. Again, I'll be looking forward to debate or any changes that might be happening to the bill, but that is where I'm leaning towards right now.
Okay. All right, so this will be the part of the session where we're, see how we're doing on time here. Yes, where we're going to turn it over to our representatives and senators, and each of you will have 90 seconds to provide a closing statement. So we can, let's start with Senator Davis, and then we'll go with Representative Shornama and finish with Representative Casson.
Sure, thank you again, everyone, for being here today. This has been a great discussion, lots of great questions, and we appreciate hearing from you and your concerns. I've ran for the legislature to be a problem solver and try to find consensus on issues and make it a positive impact. Can't always say that the votes we take are easy or that our the priorities, every bill gets a hearing. So those bills that I have to vote on sometimes aren't maybe necessarily something that I would bring forward, but they were important enough to somebody to bring forward. And so we respect that process, and everyone gets a hearing. And I've been busy this year. I've sponsored, I think, about 16 House and Senate bills. The topics of those raised are anywhere, some of the successes so far have been establishing, clarifying some law to make it possible for Narcan to be available in businesses to help with harm reduction. I have another bill for counties and townships, the Rural Access Infrastructure Fund, asking for a one-time appropriation to keep that fund alive to help our counties and townships. I also have a bill that'll be coming to the Senate floor this week regarding school bus safety, and also some of my proposals that failed that I was disappointed about, but I think are important to highlight, was currently when we talked about daycare, right now, the daycare assistance that is available from the state, you have to meet certain financial guidelines. Right now, it is eligible to students, and only undergraduate students. I had a constituent that asked about it being applicable to graduate students that meet the income guidelines. So again, something to help students, and that unfortunately was defeated. And then I also had a couple bills regarding health insurance and prior authorization and screenings, and unfortunately those were defeated as well. But if you have concerns and questions about that, I would love to talk to you more about it. And again, thank you for the privilege of serving you.
Representative Sharma.
Well, thanks again for the opportunity to speak to you. I don't know if I can do any justice to this comment in 90 seconds, but I'm going to give it a shot. Low-carbon aviation jet fuel has worldwide demand, growing. We don't have the ability to produce that in this state. I'm not a fan of the pipeline, but other states don't have to pipe it out. They can pump it underground. Other states have agreed to pipe it out, but we have not yet. That's our call. Do you understand? I'm an economic development business guy. The financial impact to the state, if we decide not to produce it, is between $500 million and $1 billion per year. That's $500 to $1,000 of economic impact per citizen. This doesn't go to the state government to be dished out. This is benefits that people are selling corn at a higher price. It's pay employees that are working at ethanol plants. If ethanol goes down to 40 bucks a barrel, oil, those ethanol plants are shut down. So we have to figure out a way to put a backstop in to make sure that they can be profitable. So, am I pro-pipeline? I could care less about whether a pipeline is put in place or not. What I do care about is missing the biggest economic development opportunity that this state has seen in my lifetime. So, thank you. And thanks again for inviting me.
Representative Casson.
Well, thank you, Dr. McEwen, for doing a great job moderating this debate. Thanks for everybody for being here. I'm going to make a couple points, and then I hope everybody has a great rest of their Saturday. And this was really a really good and wide-ranging debate, and I enjoyed it. A couple updates on bills. We did talk about the student teacher stipend bill, which I'm really proud of. Again, that came from a constituent that's in this room today, and really proud that will be heading the governor's desk. Another bill I had was a fiscal note. There's a fiscal note that's associated with amendments or initiated measures, and there was no mechanism by which that could get updated closer to an election. And when we're asking individuals to be a well-educated electorate, but we're not providing updated information, that seemed kind of odd. So you're operating on 2-year-old information. So it'd be like if you're going to go try and buy a car today, but you're going to look at your bank statement from 2 years ago. How informed are you actually going to be? So we are able to update that. So the fiscal note will be able to be updated closer to the actual election. We talked about the McCook Lake bill, which ultimately failed, but there is still the importance of providing for those individuals and also other individuals who will be facing emergency, situations in the future. I'd also highlight the unclaimed property trust fund, and there's an amendment that also is associated with that constitutional amendment to set up the trust fund. Unclaimed property is right now about a $1.2 billion liability to the state. We use the receipts that come each year from unclaimed property to basically pay for the liabilities. This would just set up a trust fund, so we are no longer using using the liabilities in our budgeting process, but would actually provide some certainty. Not trying to pat myself on the back or do any of that, but of all the things that might come from this session, this is probably going to be the one that we look down 30, 40, 50 years down the road that we all should be proud of, that we actually got this accomplished. I'll just close with this, and again, I appreciate serving you. This year's been interesting, but I think the legislature largely has lost their focus. I think we lost our focus on the future. To the gentleman in the front's question, we're stymieing growth, we're stopping projects, we're stopping infrastructure, we're doing these things. We rarely have a bill comes before us that talks about the future generations of South Dakotans. The senator over here was talking about freezing the tuition. Fantastic idea. Nope, no idea. I mean, obviously there's budgetary concerns, but nothing like that. We have nothing for tech schools, nothing for universities. Folks, we got to get back to supporting our schools, strong schools. We got to quit stymieing growth, and we all ran on being small government. We all ran on less regulation. What I've seen this year is just a big push we need more government. We need more regulation. We need to do these kinds of things. And if we're going to try and pull ourselves out of tough budget years, that's not the way to do it. So I will just make this commitment, and I'm going to continue to make this commitment to the folks here. I ran on future generations of South Dakotans and trying to do the best I can for those folks. And ultimately, the legislature needs to refocus. We need to stop worrying about things from the past. We need to stop try to bring the legislature back 30 years ago. We need to be focused on the future, and we need to be focused on the kids and giving them opportunities. So again, thank you for being here. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and I know there's 2 basketball games, so go Yotes.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you for your thoughtful questions. I encourage you to stay around and network with your representatives. Have a great Saturday.
Please give a round of applause to the moderator. She did a wonderful job.